The basement smelled of dust and ozone. A single fluorescent bulb flickered above the cluttered workbench where a 9-year-old Matthew Brennan sat hunched over a Commodore 64. His eyes burning from hours of staring at green phosphor text scrolling across the screen. Outside, the suburban street was silent except for the distant hum of lawnmowers and the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. Inside, Matthew was somewhere else, entirely lost in a world of hexadecimal code, bulletin board systems, and the crackling hiss of a 300-baud modem. His father, Robert Brennan, a civilian communications engineer for the Department of Defense, had brought home the computer 6 months earlier, a gift meant to nurture his son's uncanny aptitude for mathematics. What Robert didn't anticipate was how quickly Matthew would outgrow educational software and begin exploring the shadowy fringes of early networked computing. By summer's end, the boy had taught himself BASIC, learned to navigate ARPANET tributaries accessible through university gateways, and discovered underground BBS networks where hackers traded knowledge like Cold War spies trading secrets. Tonight, Matthew was chasing something different. 3 days earlier, he'd stumbled upon a cryptic message posted on a Berkeley VAX system by someone using the handle Architect. It was a challenge, a digital puzzle disguised as innocent chatter. For those who see beyond the veil, 192.54, 12.88, port 8421 Caesar speaks in reverse when the sun rises in Cyrillic. Matthew had copied the numbers into his notebook, the same spiral-bound pad where he sketched circuit diagrams and wrote recursive algorithms. He understood it was a riddle. The IP address was unusual, outside the normal academic ranges he'd explored. The port number seemed arbitrary, and the cryptic reference to Caesar and Cyrillic felt like layers of a cipher waiting to be unraveled. He spent 2 days researching. His school library had books on Roman history. He learned about Caesar ciphers, simple substitution codes Julius Caesar used to communicate with generals. The reverse meant shifting backward instead of forward, but Cyrillic, that took longer. He found a book about the Soviet Union, learned the Russian alphabet was called Cyrillic, invented by Byzantine monks. His young mind connected the dots, a reverse Caesar cipher applied to Russian text. On the third night, Matthew decided to try. His modem dialed through a local university guest account, piggybacking onto a trunk line that connected to the nascent internet backbone. He telnetted to the IP address, specifying port 8421. For 30 seconds, nothing. Then the screen erupted with characters, Cyrillic letters mixed with symbols, scrolling too fast to read. Matthew's heart hammered. He wasn't supposed to be here. He could feel it instinctively, the way a child knows when they've wandered into a forbidden room. He captured the output to a text file, then disconnected. For 10 minutes, he sat in silence, listening to his pulse. Upstairs, his mother was watching Dynasty. His father was reading technical manuals at the kitchen table. No one knew what Matthew had just touched. He opened the captured text. Gibberish. But he applied his theoria, reverse Caesar shift of 13 positions. ROT13 in reverse, converting Cyrillic to Latin equivalents. Slowly fragments emerged. Access node delta-7 ... Authentication protocol. Ministry priority alpha ... Matthew's hands trembled. Ministry? This wasn't a game. This was something real, something Soviet. He should have stopped, should have turned off the computer, deleted the file, gone upstairs to bed. Instead, he did what 9-year-olds do when faced with a door they VA'd accidentally unlocked. He pushed it open. He reconnected to the IP address. This time, he didn't just observe, he tried to interact. Based on the fragments he decoded, he guessed at command structures. He typed carefully, mimicking the syntax patterns he'd seen. Query node status. The response was instantaneous. Node Delta-7 operational firewall integrity. Nominal, unauthorized access attempt logged. Matthew froze. Logged. That meant someone, somewhere, had just been alerted. He disconnected immediately, his fingers clumsy on the keyboard. The modem shrieked as it severed the connection. In the silence that followed, Matthew became acutely aware of how alone he was in the basement, how thin the walls seemed, how exposed. He didn't know that 5,000 miles away was in a concrete bunker beneath Lubyanka Square in Moscow. A red light had begun flashing on a console monitored by Lieutenant Colonel Dmitry Volkov, a KGB signals intelligence officer. Volkov had been drinking tea, reviewing routine traffic logs, when the alarm triggered. His screen displayed the intrusion attempt time-stamped, traced through 3 relay points, originating from ... Virginia, United States. Volkov's blood went cold. The system Matthew had touched wasn't just any network. It was a prototype and experimental encrypted communications node designed to link KGB operatives in Western Europe with Moscow Center. It was isolated, protected by multi-layered authentication protocols that had taken Soviet computer scientists 2 years to develop. The fact that someone had penetrated even the outermost layer was catastrophic. The fact that the breach originated from deep inside American territory suggested something far worse: a coordinated CIA operation. Within minutes, Volkov's report climbed the chain of command. By midnight Moscow time, it reached the desk of Major General Yuri Andropov's successor in the 1st Chief Directorate. The general's orders were immediate and unambiguous: identify the source, assess the damage, prepare countermeasures. If this was an American intelligence operation testing Soviet defenses, it could be a prelude to something larger, perhaps even a coordinated cyber offensive timed with the ongoing NATO exercises codenamed Able Archer 83 exercises that had already pushed Soviet leadership to the brink of paranoia. Back in Fairfax, Matthew climbed the basement stairs on shaking legs. His mother smiled at him from the couch. "Bedtime, sweetheart?" He nodded, mute, and went to his room. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying what he'd done. He'd seen something he shouldn't have, touched something that didn't belong to him. Somewhere, he knew, with terrible certainty, someone had noticed. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did the analysts at NSA headquarters in Fort Meade, Maryland, where automated monitoring systems had flagged unusual activity on the same university trunk line Matthew had used outbound traffic to a known Soviet IP range during a period of unprecedented Cold War tension. By 3 a.m. Eastern Time, the trace was complete. The origin point, a residential address in Fairfax, registered to Robert Brennan, Dodd contractor with active security clearance. At 4:47 a.m., 3 black sedans left Fort Meade, heading south on the Baltimore-Washington Parkway toward Virginia. In the lead car, Agent Sarah Chen of the Defense Intelligence Agency reviewed the briefing file. A child, 9 years old, accessed a KGB network node. Either this was the most elaborate false flag operation she'd encountered, or something unprecedented had just occurred. A child had stumbled into the most dangerous game on Earth, and now both superpowers knew his name.
Ow.
Dawn broke over Fairfax. Matthew, finally drifting into exhausted sleep, didn't hear the cars pull up outside. Didn't hear the quiet knock on the door, or his father's shocked voice in the hallway. He woke to his mother's hand on his shoulder, her face pale, and the terrible words, "Matthew, there are people here who need to talk to you." The Brennan family sat in their own living room like strangers at an interrogation. Robert Brennan, still in his bathrobe, gripped a coffee mug with white knuckles. His wife Ellen held Matthew's hand so tightly the boy's fingers had gone numb. Across from them, 3 federal agents occupied the floral-patterned sofa that had been a wedding gift from Ellen's mother, a piece of furniture that had witnessed birthday parties and Christmas mornings, now hosting men and women with security badges clipped to dark suits. Agent Sarah Chen, a petite woman in her mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a Princeton computer science degree hidden behind her DIA credentials, leaned forward. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but Matthew could hear the steel underneath. "Matthew, I need you to tell me exactly what you did last night. Every step, every command you typed. Can you do that?" Matthew looked at his father. Robert's face had aged a decade in the past hour. When the agents had first arrived, he'd been defiant, threatening to call lawyers, demanding explanations. Then Agent Chen had said one sentence: "Your son accessed a Soviet military network." The defiance had crumbled. Now Robert just nodded at his son, his voice hollow. "Tell them the truth, Matt. All of it." So Matthew told them about the puzzle on the Berkeley BBS, about decoding the Cyrillic cipher, about connecting to the IP address and seeing the response that mentioned ministry and firewall integrity. He spoke in the flat, technical language of a child who understands code better than emotion, describing hexadecimal values and port numbers, while his mother quietly wept beside him. When he finished, the room was silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock. Agent Marcus Webb, a former Army Signals Intelligence officer with a face like weathered granite, finally spoke. "Son, do you understand what you accessed?" Matthew shook his head. "That was a KGB communications node. Experimental. Highly classified. You triggered alarms in Moscow? Right now, Soviet intelligence believes they're under attack by CIA cyber warfare specialists." Webb paused, letting that sink in. "They're looking for you, Matthew. Not a 9-year-old kid, they're looking for a team of adult hackers, maybe military intelligence officers. But when they trace that signal back far enough, they'll find this house, this address, your family." Ellen Brennan made a sound like a wounded animal. Robert pulled her close, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "What does that mean?" he asked. "What happens now?" Agent Chen exchanged glances with her colleagues. The third agent, Dr. Leonard Hirsch, a SAC cryptanalyst with thick glasses and a permanent expression of worried concentration, cleared his throat. "In normal circumstances, we'd relocate you. Witness protection protocols, new identities, new city, complete separation from your current life." He paused. "But these aren't normal circumstances. Timing is ... catastrophic." "Abel Archer," Robert whispered. As a DOD contractor, he'd heard the rumors. NATO's ongoing military exercises simulating nuclear release procedures had the Soviets convinced World War III was imminent. The KGB and GRU were on highest alert, interpreting every unusual signal as confirmation of American first strike preparations. "Exactly," Chen confirmed. 3 days ago, Soviet radar systems experienced a malfunction that nearly triggered a nuclear response. An officer named Stanislav Petrov refused to report incoming missiles because he doubted the data. That's how close we are to the edge right now. And last night, your son completely by accident confirmed every paranoid fear in Moscow. They think we're probing their networks in preparation for a decapitation strike." Matthew didn't fully understand the words, but he understood the fear in the room. He'd done something terrible, something that might hurt people. His voice came out small, broken. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. I just wanted to solve the puzzle." Agent Webb's expression softened fractionally. "We know, son. This isn't your fault. Whoever posted that challenged that architect. They're the real problem. We're trying to identify them now. We need to focus on keeping you safe." "What's the plan?" Robert asked, his engineer's mind automatically shifting to problem-solving mode despite his terror. Dr. Hirsch pulled a folder from his briefcase. "We've run the scenarios. If we move you immediately, the sudden disappearance might draw more attention. Soviet agents monitoring DOD contractor movements would notice. But if we do nothing and they complete their trace, ... Double quotes. He didn't finish the sentence. "There's a third option," Chen said. "We bring Matthew into protective custody. Not as a suspect, as an asset. We have him work with our analysts to reverse engineer exactly how he got in. Use that information to close the vulnerabilities before the Soviets realize how accidental the breach was. And we create a cover story, a plausible explanation that deflects Soviet suspicion away from this house. You want to use my son?" Ellen's voice was sharp with maternal fury. He's 9 years old. I want to save his life," Chen replied quietly, "and possibly prevent a war. If Moscow believes this was a sophisticated CIA operation, they'll escalate. But if we can demonstrate it was an isolated incident, a fluke in their own security protocols that allowed accidental access, it de-escalates. Matthew's knowledge, his exact methodology is the key to that demonstration." Robert looked at his son. Matthew looked back, and in that moment, both saw reflections of themselves. The father who'd spent his career building secure communications systems. The son who'd broken one with curiosity and brilliance. "What do you think, Matt?" Robert asked softly. Matthew thought about the green text scrolling across his screen. About the red lights flashing in Moscow. About doors he'd opened without meaning to, and the people on both sides who might die if those doors stayed open. He was 9 years old. He wanted to play outside, to read comic books, to be normal. But normal had ended last night in the basement. "I'll help," he said. For the next 12 hours, the Brennan house became an ad hoc operations center. NSA technicians set up secure communications equipment in the basement. Transforming Matthew's amateur hackerspace into a miniature version of Fort Meade's cyber operations floor. Matthew sat at his Commodore 64, now connected to government systems, walking analysts through his breach step by step. They tested his theories, mapped the vulnerabilities, documented every command. Dr. Hirsch watched the boy work with growing astonishment. "He's using intuitive logic we'd need PhDs to formalize," he muttered to Chen. He saw patterns in the Cyrillic output that our best cryptanalysts would have needed days to identify. Meanwhile, in Moscow, the hunt continued. KGB technical teams had traced the intrusion through multiple nodes but hit a wall at the American University gateway. The traffic logs showed only a guest account accessed from a pool of campus IP addresses. But they had the timestamp, and they had the signature of the intrusion, the specific commands used, the pattern of the probe, and they had standing orders from the Politburo. Find the perpetrators by any means necessary. Colonel Volkov knew the Americans were good, but this felt different. The probe had been ... clumsy in places, curious rather than methodical, almost like someone learning as they went. That worried him more than a professional operation would have. Doctrinals followed doctrine. Curious amateurs were unpredictable, and unpredictability during Able Archer was lethal. By evening, Agent Chen made the call to Washington. "We have what we need." The boy identified a flaw in their Caesar variant encryption layer that allowed initial handshake completion without proper authentication. It's brilliant and stupid simultaneously. Security through obscurity approach that failed because someone solved their riddle. The voice on the other end was Deputy Director Thomas Crane of the DIA. "Can we demonstrate it was accidental?" "Can show the methodology is child-level simple once you know the trick. It might convince them it wasn't a CIA operation." "Might isn't good enough, Sarah. Able Archer ends in 6 days. If Moscow thinks we're preparing a cyber offensive as part of a broader first strike, they could launch preemptively. We need certainty." Chen looked at Matthew, now asleep on the couch, his young face peaceful in exhaustion. "Then we need to send them a message. Unofficial. Deniable. Through back channels. We need to tell them what really happened without admitting we're telling them." There was a long pause. "You're suggesting we burn the operation to save the peace?" "I'm suggesting we tell the truth," Chen said. "Sometimes that's the most radical option available." In the Brennan living room, as night fell over Fairfax, a 9-year-old boy slept under a blanket, unaware that his accidental adventure had set in motion a desperate diplomatic gambit, one that would unfold in shadows, through intermediaries, in the narrow spaces between two empires balanced on the edge of mutual annihilation. Outside, the black sedans remained parked, their occupants vigilant. Inside, Robert Brennan held his wife and wondered if his son's curiosity had saved the world or doomed them all. The answer wouldn't come for days. But the clock was ticking, and in Moscow, Colonel Volkov was getting closer to the truth. The Café de la Paix occupied a corner of Rue de Lausanne that had witnessed a century of clandestine meetings. During World War II, Allied spies and Nazi officers had shared its marble tables, separated only by the fiction of Swiss neutrality. Now, in the autumn of 1983, it hosted a different kind of war, one fought with whispers and deniable conversations between men who officially didn't know each other existed. Dr. Viktor Petrov sat at a corner table, stirring his espresso with mechanical precision. To any observer, he was simply another middle-aged academic attending a telecommunications conference at the Palais des Nations. His credentials identified him as a professor from Moscow State University, specializing in network protocols. His actual employer was Directorate T of the KGB, the division responsible for scientific and technical intelligence. He'd been in Geneva for 3 days, attending tedious panels about fiber optics and satellite relay systems, when he received the coded message hidden in a conference bulletin. Café de la Paix, 3 p.m. table, 7-year-old friend from Vienna. Victor had no friends from Vienna. The message was operational code for an unofficial contact, someone from the American intelligence community, requesting dialogue outside formal diplomatic channels. These meetings happened perhaps twice a year, usually concerning matters too sensitive or too urgent for embassy cables and formal protocols. Victor's instructions from Moscow Center were clear: attend, listen, report, but commit to nothing. At 3:07 p.m., a man in a gray suit approached the table. James Everett looked like a middle-aged insurance salesman, receding hairline, wire-rimmed glasses, a slight paunch that spoke of desk work and disappointing lunches. His actual position was special assistant to the deputy director of the CIA's Office of Soviet Analysis. He'd been conducting unofficial dialogues with Soviet counterparts for 15 years. Ever since a shared vodka bottle in Helsinki had established a grudging mutual respect between enemies who understood each other better than their own colleagues. "Professor Petrov," Everett said in accented Russian, extending his hand. "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Everett." Victor replied in equally accented English, shaking hands briefly. "I confess curiosity. Our last conversation was, 2 years ago? Berlin, Prague? And we discussed grain shipments, if I recall." Everett sat down, ordered coffee from the hovering waiter, then waited until they were alone again. "This is more urgent." Victor's expression didn't change, but his fingers stopped stirring the espresso. "I'm listening. 3 days ago, your systems detected an intrusion. A probe of an experimental communications node originating from American territory. Your analysts concluded it was a CIA operation reconnaissance for a larger offensive, possibly coordinated with Able Archer." Victor's face remained impassive, but Everett saw the microscopic tension in his jaw. The Americans knew. Of course they knew. "I'm not aware of any such incident," Victor said carefully. "Of course not. I'm not officially telling you about it." Everett leaned back as the waiter delivered his coffee. "But hypothetically, if such an incident had occurred, I'd want my Russian colleagues to understand what really happened. Because the truth is far less threatening than your current assumptions." "Hypothetically," Victor echoed, his tone neutral. Everett reached into his jacket slowly, giving Victor time to assess, and pulled out a manila envelope. He slid it across the table. Side as a technical analysis. No classified information, nothing that violates espionage protocols. Just a detailed breakdown of the methodology used in this hypothetical intrusion. The commands, the approach, the logic flow. Victor didn't touch the envelope. "And why would you share this?" "Because the methodology is brilliant and idiotic in equal measure.
Yes.
It's the work of someone who understood your encryption theory, but had no professional training. Someone who solved your Caesar variant cipher because they read a children's book about Roman history and a library reference book about the Cyrillic alphabet." Everett paused. "Someone 9 years old." For the first time, Victor's composure cracked. His eyes widened fractionally. "That's not possible. It's documented, verified, witnessed by multiple federal agents." Everett tapped the envelope. "A child accessed a university computer network. Found a cryptographic puzzle someone posted on a bulletin board system. We're still hunting that someone. By the way, and followed it down the rabbit hole. He didn't know what he was accessing. He didn't understand the significance. He thought it was a game." Victor finally picked up the envelope, his hands steady despite the chaos in his mind. "Your intelligence services expect us to believe a child penetrated KGB security protocols? I expect you to analyze the methodology and reach your own conclusions. But yes, your security through obscurity approach hiding a complex system behind a clever riddle failed because a 9-year-old American boy with a Commodore 64 is smarter than you anticipated." Everett's tone wasn't mocking, just exhausted. "Victor, we're a week away from Able Archer reaching its climax. Your leadership already thinks we're preparing a first strike. If they believe this intrusion was CIA cyber reconnaissance, it confirms their worst fears. But if they understand it was a child's accident, it's just an embarrassing security flaw. Which interpretation do you think keeps the missiles in their silos?" Victor opened the envelope under the table, scanning the first page. The technical detail was overwhelming command sequences, timestamps, decoded cipher outputs. It read exactly like what Everett claimed. A brilliant amateur stumbling through sophisticated systems with intuitive logic rather than professional training. "You're asking me to report this up my chain of command? To tell the Politburo that our experimental security was breached by a child? I'm asking you to tell them the truth. The embarrassing, deflationary, war-preventing truth." Everett finished his coffee. "Or don't. Keep believing it was CIA. Watch what happens when your leadership acts on that belief." Victor was quiet for a long moment, studying the American's face. They'd have been playing this game for years. The dance of spies who respected each other's intelligence too much to waste time on obvious lies. "The boy," Victor said finally. "Is he safe?" "For now, we have him under protection." But if your colleagues trace the breach back to his family's address, ... double quotes, Everett didn't finish. Victor slipped the envelope inside his jacket. Hypothetically, if I were to pass this information through appropriate channels, and if those channels found it credible, the investigation might conclude the breach was due to a design flaw rather than hostile action. The node would be taken offline, the protocols redesigned, and the incident classified as an internal security failure. Hypothetically, that would be a relief to many people on my side. And the child. What happens to him? Everett smiled sadly. Goes back to being 9 years old, if he still can. We're recommending no charges, no publicity, no record. He didn't commit a crime, he solved a puzzle. The crime was posting that puzzle in the first place. Victor stood, adjusting his jacket. For what it's worth, James, I believe you. Not because I trust Americans, but because no intelligence service would admit to this level of vulnerability. Only truth is this humiliating. That's the most backhanded compliment I've received in 20 years of service. It's the best you'll get from me. Victor extended his hand again. They shook, two warriors in an invisible war, agreeing to prevent a visible one. Good luck with Able Archer. Try not to start World War III in the next 6 days. You too? And Victor. Everett held the handshake a moment longer. Thank you. Whatever else we are to each other, we're also two men who'd prefer not to watch the world burn. Victor nodded and left the cafe. He walked 3 blocks before entering a phone booth, dialing a Moscow number from memory. The conversation was brief, coded, urgent. By midnight Moscow time, the envelope's contents would reach Colonel Volkov's desk. By dawn, it would climb to the deputy directors of Directorate T. By the following afternoon, a secret memo would land on the desk of General Secretary Yuri Andropov himself. Still weak from kidney disease, but sharp enough to recognize the difference between American aggression and American embarrassment. In Fairfax, Virginia, Matthew Brennan was eating breakfast pancakes his mother had made with extra chocolate chips. A small apology for the world his curiosity had touched. He didn't know about the cafe in Geneva, the envelope exchanging hands, the diplomatic machinery grinding into motion to protect him from consequences he couldn't fully grasp. He just knew the men in suits were still outside. His father looked tired, and his computer was locked in a government evidence bag. Agent Sarah Chen sat in the Brennan kitchen, drinking instant coffee and monitoring secure communications on a laptop. When the coded message arrived from Langley, package delivered, recipient receptive, she allowed herself the first full breath in 3 days. The back channel had worked. The truth was out there, floating through Soviet intelligence networks, a bizarre life raft in a sea of Cold War paranoia. But it wasn't over. Truth was fragile. It could be dismissed, reinterpreted, overruled by hardliners who preferred their enemies to be competent and threatening, rather than vulnerable and human. For the next 72 hours, its Able Archer 83 built toward its nuclear simulation climax. American and Soviet intelligence agencies would watch each other with unprecedented intensity, looking for signs of misunderstanding, miscalculation, or malice. And in the center of that maelstrom, invisible to both empires, was a 9-year-old boy who'd accidentally proven that in the digital age, warfare could be triggered by curiosity and peace preserved by honesty. The question was whether either side could afford to believe it. The nightmare came every night now. Matthew would be back in the basement watching the Cyrillic characters scroll across his screen. But in the dream, they transformed into missiles, launching from silos, each line of code becoming a contrail streaking toward cities he'd seen in his geography textbook. He'd wake up gasping, his mother already at his bedside, holding him until the shaking stopped. She never said it's just a dream anymore. They both knew it had been more than that. 5 days had passed since the Geneva meeting. 5 days of waiting while Able Archer 83 continued its simulation of nuclear war, and the world held its breath. The black sedans were still parked outside the Brennan house, though the agents had rotated shifts. Agent Chen had left on the 3rd day, recalled to Washington for crisis briefings, replaced by Agent Webb, whose granite face had softened slightly toward the family he was protecting. Robert Brennan had stopped going to work. His DOD supervisors understood his home had become a classified site, his son a national security asset. Ellen had taken leave from her teaching job, unable to focus on lesson plans when her child's safety hung in the balance of Soviet deliberations. The house felt simultaneously crowded with federal presence and hollow with unspoken fears. On the morning of September 21st, Agent Webb's encrypted phone buzzed during breakfast. He answered with his usual terse Webb, then listened for 3 minutes without speaking. Matthew watched his face carefully. He'd learned to read the micro-expressions of the agents. The way their jaw muscles tightened or relaxed based on the news they received. Webb's jaw relaxed. When he hung up, Webb looked at the family seated around the kitchen table. Abel Archer concluded 12 hours ago. NATO forces are standing down from the exercise. Soviet forces are returning to normal alert status. Moscow issued no unusual directives, no mobilizations, no heightened threat conditions. The silence stretched for 5 seconds before Ellen Brennan began crying, not the quiet tears of the past week, but deep, racking sobs of relief. Robert held her, his own eyes wet. Matthew felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he hadn't realized was there until it untied. The back channel worked. Robert asked when he could speak. We believe so. Signals intelligence indicates the KGB investigation was terminated 3 days ago. Their official conclusion was security protocol failure due to design vulnerability. They've taken the network node offline permanently, redesigned their authentication systems, and classified the entire incident. Webb pulled out a chair, sitting down heavily. For what it's worth, we also identified the architect who posted that puzzle, a freelance programmer in Berkeley with delusions of building a global cryptographic network. He had no idea the IP address he was publicizing belonged to Soviet military infrastructure. He degrabbed it from a list of experimental nodes on a hacker BBS, thought it was an academic system. He's currently in federal custody facing charges that'll keep him busy for the next decade. Matthew found his voice, small but steady. So, it's over. Webb met his eyes. The immediate crisis, yes. But there are consequences, Matthew. What you did accidentally, innocently revealed something profound. The digital networks connecting our world are more fragile and more interconnected than anyone realized. A child with a home computer and a modem can reach systems that were supposed to be isolated and secure. That terrifies both governments. Are we safe? Ellen asked. Will the Soviets come after Matthew? We've established protocols. Investigation in Moscow concluded without identifying your address. The technical analysis convinced them the breach was enabled by their own security flaw, not by sophisticated tracking of their systems. As far as Soviet records show, the intrusion came from a university terminal pool, untraceable to individuals. Webb paused. However, we're recommending ongoing monitoring, not surveillance protection. For the next year at minimum, we'll maintain awareness of any unusual interest in your family. You'll have emergency contact numbers, quarterly check-ins. Robert's jaw tightened. You're saying we're not completely safe. I'm saying you as safe as anyone can be in 1983. Webb's honesty was brutal, but respectful. The world Matthew revealed where a 9-year-old can accidentally start a war is the world we all live in now. Digital networks don't care about intentions or age or borders. They just connect things that maybe shouldn't be connected. Over the next week, the agents dismantled their equipment and departed. The basement returned to being a basement, though Matthew's Commodore 64 remained in evidence storage. Dr. Hirsch visited one last time, bringing a gift, a new computer, a Commodore 128, with a handwritten note. For curiosity without consequences. Use it well. Let you. Matthew set it up but didn't turn it on for 3 days. When he finally did, he wrote a simple program. 10 print. 20 go to 10. He watched the words scroll endlessly down the screen, a confession. A penance, a 9-year-old's attempt to process what his curiosity had wrought. His father found him there an hour later, staring at the loop. Robert sat down beside his son, put an arm around his shoulders, and said something Matthew would remember for the rest of his life. You discovered something important, Matt, that power and danger are closer than we think. One person can change the world sometimes without meaning to. It's not a reason to stop being curious. It's a reason to be responsible with your curiosity. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Colonel Volkov sat in his office beneath Lubyanka Square, reading the final classified report on the incident. The technical analysis from Geneva had been convincing, embarrassingly so. The KGB's elaborate security through obscurity approach had failed because they'd underestimated the problem-solving capabilities of civilians, especially young ones unburdened by professional assumptions. But Volkov had spent 20 years in intelligence work, and he'd learned to read between the lines of official conclusions. The American analysis had been too detailed, too accommodating, the back-channel delivery too carefully timed. Someone in Washington had wanted Moscow to believe the child hacker story very badly. That didn't make it false. The technical evidence was convincing, but it made Volkov wonder what else might be true. He pulled out a personal notebook, one that would never be filed in official archives, wrote a single entry. September 1983. If a child can penetrate our networks by accident, what can their intelligence services do on purpose? And if their intelligence services wanted us to believe it was an accident, what does that tell us about their actual capabilities? The Americans showed us a vulnerability their own, ours, everyone's. Was this warning or threat? Perhaps both. The digital age has begun. We are all children fumbling in the dark. He locked the notebook in his desk and deleted the thought from his official mind. The investigation was closed. The party had its conclusion. The world had avoided war. Sometimes, in the paranoid mathematics of the Cold War, that was the best truth available.